Give the gift of hope this season by packing an Operation Christmas Child shoebox gift with fun toys, school supplies, and personal care items. National Collection Week is happening now through November 24th. These simple gifts provide children in need the opportunity to hear the gospel message and attend a discipleship program. Bring your packed shoebox gift to a local drop-off location this week. Visit SamaritansPurse.org/OCC to learn more.
The world is becoming increasingly proficient at telling stories that deny God. As such, we need Thinking Christian to become as natural as breathing. Welcome to the Thinking Christian podcast. I'm Dr. James Spencer. Through calm, thoughtful, theological discussions, Thinking Christian highlights the ways God is working in the world and questions the underlying social, cultural, and political assumptions that hinder Christians from becoming more like Christ. Now, on to today's episode of Thinking Christian. Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of Thinking Christian. I'm Dr. James Spencer, and I am joined today by Pieter Valk. Pieter is the founder and director of Equip, and he's also a founding brother of an ecumenical monastery in Nashville, and I'll let him talk a little bit more about that. But we're going to be talking a little bit about the issues of singleness and maleness in the church, and probably a few other topics. And so excited to have Pieter here. Pieter, welcome to the program. Thanks for being on.
Yeah, James, thanks for inviting me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about Equip. I mean, as I was preparing for the interview, I got on the website and looked through different things and read a couple of articles. Really great stuff. But explain to people what Equip does and how Equip works.
Yeah, so my day job is I run a ministry that for the past 11 years, we have equipped over 35,000 Christian leaders to better minister to people who experience same-sex attraction or gender incongruence according to a biblical sexual ethic. And a lot of what we at Equip do is kind of coachings, trainings, consulting for churches and church leaders. But we also have a lot of kind of on-demand resources available for individual parents, individual pastors who want to upskill in their ability to provide pastoral care to LGBT plus people according to a historic Christian sexual ethic. And that work matters to me because I am a Christian and I experience same-sex attraction, and I believe that a biblical sexual ethic is God's best for me, and personally walking out vocational singleness, a lifetime abstinent singleness for the sake of kingdom work with undivided attention. So that's a little bit about the work of Equip. We could probably get more into it, what we see as common challenges and solutions that we help churches with. But also I know, a lot of the work we do at Equip is realizing that the challenges that our churches and families are facing in terms of kind of ministering to this population really have to do with broader challenges in the church. We just kind of see them and notice them more among LGBT plus people than elsewhere. And a big one of that is that few of our churches are places where anyone could walk out long-term or lifetime singleness and really thrive and find the support they need. And that is not unique to same-sex attracted Christians who feel called to celibacy. Much more numerously, there are single, straight, adult women who prefer to marry, but there aren't enough faithful men in our churches. There's divorcees and widows. So there's a lot of people walking out long-term singleness in our churches that aren't finding the support that they need. And we know from research from the Barna Group and some other places that being unmarried and experiencing loneliness and that unmarriedness increases people's chances of doubting whether God exists, and of not being able to rebound from kind of in a period of extreme kind of doubt. And leaving the faith. And so these are gospel issues for us. That's why we do this work. And it's got broad application as well.
I agree. It's interesting. I just taught through 1 Corinthians, and if you think through 1 Corinthians, and you get to that chapter where Paul is really interacting with the Corinthian claim that man and woman shouldn't have sexual relations, and he deals with singleness within that context.
Mm-hmm.
And what you see there is Paul basically saying, look, singleness can be a viable option for Christians. And in fact, sometimes it's preferable. And he would say, I think he phrased it like, I wish all were like me.
Sure.
But he recognizes that not everyone is going to be like another.
Right.
The whole sort of
And I've had other folks on who talked about marriage, and Beth Allison Barr, I'm sure you're familiar with her work.
Sure.
She talks about the medieval shift where women really did start to be less pulpit oriented and more pastor's wife oriented.
Mm.
If I'm recalling kind of the book correctly, it's From the Pulpit to the Pastor's Wife.
Mm-hmm.
If I remember that right. But she talks about there, these issues of singleness were really very much an issue during that medieval period. And it just feels like we've very much flipped post-Reformation into a place where marriage is the preferred mechanism for and preferred mode of being in the church. And singleness, while we don't necessarily poo-poo it, it isn't exactly something, to your point, where you can find the resources to what does it look like to live single in the church.
Yeah.
Am I articulating that in an intelligible way?
I think you're naming it just right. I mean, I think the Reformation was responding accurately to some mistakes, some ways that celibacy was both being taught as holier than marriage, which it is not, but also the Catholic Church was not supporting Catholic priests well, and then covering up the fact that they were being unfaithful in their celibacy. Okay. But it does seem like in some ways maybe the Reformation overcorrected a little bit, and then started teaching, overcorrected a little bit. So we're still kind of dealing in some ways with the negative effects of that split. But also, we can learn from that. We can improve.
Yeah. As you look at this from the New Testament perspective, so I'm older. I focused my PhD on the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
And the Old Testament family is, I would say, far more emphasized than you see it in the New Testament.
Sure.
It's not that it's absent in the New Testament. Neither is, sort of evangelism absent in the Old Testament.
Sure.
Right? But biological imperative was much stronger in the Old Testament.
Absolutely.
As you move into the New Testament, what do you make of that shift in emphasis and how it allows for maybe
Sure.
how it gestures toward a life of singleness?
Yeah. So, and the New Testament's not throwing away the Old Testament, right? We are an Old Testament people. It's a continuation. And I think where the New Testament goes with this makes a lot of sense. So Old Testament, a big part of God's covenant with his people is I will bless you through your being fruitful and multiplying, and the way you join God's family was from birth into a Jewish family. Yeah. And so then understandably, barrenness, being a literal eunuch or being a metaphorical eunuch, being a celibate person, being a person without spouse, without kids, was seen as being like, you're really missing out on a key part of the covenant in the Old Testament. So it makes sense, right? But we see even in Isaiah 56, we see this this preview of a Savior will come, and a Savior will establish kind of a new order where the barren, the celibate, the eunuch, either literal or metaphorical, will find equal place in God's family.
Yeah.
And then I think fast forward to Matthew 19, we see Jesus basically kind of instituting a vocation of singleness that is normative alongside Christian marriage. Less common, but normative, not an exception to the rule, not a weird kind of thing that for a few maybe they're doing it faithfully in the Old Testament, but for most it is a failing to pull their weight in the community if they are still single. Jesus is saying, I'm establishing a vocation of singleness that is normative yet less common, and he uses this eunuch language. It seems to a lot of scholars that he's basically pointing back to Isaiah 56, and he says, this is the moment. I'm bringing this full circle. So this makes sense to us because Jesus is establishing a new covenant where we do not just join we don't join God's family by being born into it. We join God's family by being grafted into it through baptism and profession of faith. And so this means that while, in my opinion, with my kind of Anglican, Anglo-Catholic leanings, I do think that the invitation to be fruitful and multiply still applies to those who are called to Christian marriage.
Yes.
But it means not all are called to Christian marriage.
Right.
But all are called to be spiritually procreative.
Yeah.
All are called to disciple believers, to share their testimony with hopes that the Holy Spirit will do the work of bringing more to our family. And so I think there is a shift there. Okay. But I think interestingly, maybe the last thing I'll end on is maybe what you mentioned about family.
Yeah.
There is a sense in the Old Testament that one of the big benefits of marriage was it was a provision of financial security and physical protection and legacy. Those three things. And I do think that there's some odd ways that in some Christian spaces we speak of singleness as if it is a call to loneliness for the sake of the gospel. And throwing off our needs for the local church and just going wherever the Holy Spirit kind of strangely leads us. But that is not how it was practiced in the early church. And I don't see anything in the scriptures that hints to that. Actually, quite the contrary. Well, at least what I see in the New Testament is a suggestion that that those called to vocational singleness are called to just as much family, just as much community, just as much connection and commitment and stability as those called to Christian marriage. But they're going to find that in the body of Christ. And it's the blood of Christ that kind of binds us more so than our biology, who we are blood related to. Not to say that Jesus is discarding that. He's not saying do away with the commandments and ignore your father and mother, Right. But what he's saying is, let's add into that, So I'll stop there.
No, really helpful. You transition into family there. One of the things that I've noticed, and I don't want to put him on blast or anything like that. This is really my idea. I read Mark Driscoll's book, Act Like Men.
Sure.
One of the things I noticed when I'm reading that book is that masculinity was very much tied to fatherhood, which I find sort of interesting.
Sure.
Right? Because what it feels like we're doing is we can't disconnect what it means to be a man from what it means to be a father.
Mm-hmm.
And so as we think about this issue of singleness, there are some downstream issues, right, that we've almost got to think through more carefully, because being a father is certainly something that only a man can do. We could say that. But it isn't something that is definitive for a man to do, at least in that biological imperative. And so as you think about singleness, as you think about manhood, as you think about perceptions of masculinity, right, which is a thorny issue anyway.
Sure.
How does singleness sort of play into that? And what does it look like to be, I even hesitate to use the term, a biblical man?
Sure.
Who doesn't have a family, who doesn't have kids, who doesn't have biological children. How would you think through that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think the Christian men are called to be generative, are called to be spiritually creative, are called to be spiritual fathers, are called to do kingdom work in ways that are sacrificial and tenacious and require courage. I think all those things are true. I think Mark might be noticing the right problem in some ways, but maybe giving a little bit off of a solution. And I would say the problem is, well, let me back up. First, I think it might be helpful to make a distinction between the common singleness that we are all born into versus the kind of vocational singleness that Jesus talks about in Matthew 19 and Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians 7, that you intentionally step into and commit to, that is distinct from the singleness we're all born into.
That is helpful.
I do think that what we see in the scriptures, but also in the history of the church, is this kind of invitation that we're all born into common singleness. And then in our teenage years, young adult years, we discern whether we are called to Christian marriage or an intentional, robust, sacrificial, vocational singleness. And then we choose one and we commit to it, and we get down to the work of the kingdom work that those vocations involve.
Yeah.
And I think what Mark's maybe the problem he's getting at, and I think truly is a problem, is we have too many Christian young adults persisting in common singleness into their 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s, right? I think we have too little Christian marriage in the church and too little vocational singleness in the church.
So almost like there's a default option that we're not being intentional enough about one way or the other.
Yeah.
And he's emphasizing this sort of, let's be intentional about getting married. Let's be intentional about being fathers.
Yeah.
But, and just not really mentioning as much the flip side of that coin, which is we also need to be intentional about deciding I shouldn't be commonly single. I should be vocationally single.
Yeah.
I like that. That's really helpful.
Yeah.
Really
so
helpful.
I think we need more of both. I think Mark's probably right in the sense that we need more Christian marriage in our churches. We need less people continuing into singleness in their 20s and 30s, more people settling down and then doing the kingdom work within Christian marriage that is raising kids for the sake of the kingdom. And we need more people committing to vocational singleness. And I think, I don't think those are in competition. I actually think discernment, pushing kind of young adults to discern earnestly and encouraging them to commit to something and settle down into something is a rising tide that lifts all boats.
Very helpful. I like that distinction, and it is extremely helpful. It hits on a topic that I think probably is interesting to talk about as well, which is that sort of delayed adolescence and continual. I just read a study the other day, and I don't remember all the stats exactly, but you have a bigger push with younger men, particularly younger Christian men, for marriage and family, and you have a much less of a push for younger women and getting into marriage and family. So now we're almost getting this mismatch where I think for a long time the stereotype has been men settle down, go sort of what have you.
Yeah.
And now we're almost getting the flip side of that. It seems like this other, an overcorrection in both ways, and so we're going to end up. I like the distinction with a lot of people are probably going to just opt for common singleness without really thinking through their vocational. What are they supposed to be doing for Christ in the moment?
Yeah. And it's tough because they've not. I mean, most of these young adults were not taught to kind of consider both vocational singleness and Christian marriage, to anticipate that they will one day ask the Lord which gift He wants to give. They didn't see great models sometimes of either vocational singleness or Christian marriage, so it makes sense why young adults would hesitate. And I understand that, we hear from some circles that, our sanctification is never over, our discipleship is never over, our maturation is never over. And for many, stepping into, and you're never ready for Christian marriage, but for many men, maybe stepping into Christian marriage is one of the biggest ways that you will grow up, But I also get why people would hesitate to encourage maybe people who are less mature to just get into Christian marriage expecting that will mature you. So I appreciate the tension. It's hard.
Yeah. Well, you've written a lot on the issue of singleness, the issue of celibacy, and I think also that, and I appreciate Equip's emphasis on that traditional sexual ethic.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I read on the website that I kind of like to just explore with you a little bit is how the way you approach these matters in caring for gay and lesbian people within the church, how that elevates everyone's sexuality. I think that's the way it was put on the website. And so as you think through, again, these issues of singleness are not disconnected from sex.
Yeah.
The issues of marriage, obviously, are not disconnected from sex. And neither are the other sort of issues that you're dealing with, the LGBTQ issues. And so how do you see this as you work with churches? How do you see that elevating their understanding of sex or sexual ethics, sexual theological ethics?
Sure. Yeah. So, I'll answer that in two ways. First, that if we just assume that marriage is for everyone, that it's the default, and that also it is kind of the primary tool to deal with young adult men's lack of sexual discipleship.
Okay.
Their issues with pornography and lust. It's a remedy for weakness. We're turning kind of what I would say Christian sacramental marriage into something much thinner and less meaningful.
Yeah.
You know, we've made marriage really small.
Almost like a coping device.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And marriage is supposed to be this beautiful thing that preaches the gospel, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that hurts straight people in our churches. That hurts married people in our churches when that's what we've made marriage into. And some of why that is that way is because we lack kind of the balancing element of a robust teaching and practice of vocational singleness in our churches for straight people.
Yeah.
But I think the way that comes up in kind of ministry to LGBT plus people, but then later becomes a key lever to all of us doing this well, is, you know, what myself and many of my peers who grew up in the church realized when we went through puberty that we experienced same-sex attraction. We looked around and we saw that, well, our people we knew who were straight and Christian and young adults or further into adulthood, they didn't seem to be taking what the Bible said about considering lifetime celibacy seriously. They didn't seem to be taking what the Bible had to say about kind of marriage being a space for raising children for the sake of the kingdom sacrificially. Didn't seem to be taking that seriously. They didn't seem to be taking seriously what the scriptures had to say about unbiblical divorce and remarriage.
Yeah.
And so what the enemy whispered into our ears was, straight people don't care about what the Bible says about sexuality, so why should you? And that was a pretty compelling lie. That was a pretty compelling kind of accusation of hypocrisy and double standard, and therefore I shouldn't take God's wisdom seriously either. The reality is, keep your eyes focused on your own plate.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what anyone else is doing. If God's wisdom for me is God's wisdom for me, is God's best is really God's best, it's still good for me. Yeah. Even if other people are being tricked into disregarding God's best, you know? Yeah. So, but there's something to that, right? That if we actually raise the bar for everyone's sexual stewardship in our churches, we will rob the enemy of that lie. Also, the ways that we've been kind of bending and breaking God's wisdom for straight people's sexual stewardship, it maybe has been more convenient for some straight Christians in the short term, but it has not been good for straight Christians in the long term. I mean, there's high rates of divorce, there's high rates of loneliness among straight Christians. So I don't think kind of returning to teaching God's wisdom for everyone's sexual stewardship and providing people with the supports they need to live into that, that's not about making things hard for straight Christians so it's equally hard for everyone. It's actually about bringing life-giving wisdom to straight Christians in our churches. So I think it's a win-win.
You know, the Bible tells us, I will bless those who bless you. That's not just a nice sentiment, it's biblical prophecy. And it's a commandment from God, it's a calling, and right now we're called to act. The teachings of the New Testament are deeply intertwined with the Hebrew Scriptures. As Christians, we are called to honor and respect this shared heritage. The Apostle Paul reminds us in Romans 11:18, do not consider yourself to be superior to those other branches. If you do, consider this. You did not support the root, but the root supports you. Supporting the people of Israel is more than a belief. It's a biblical mandate. By partnering with the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, IFCJ, we can live out this calling together. Just as the fellowship blesses God's children, we know that you will be blessed too. Learn more about the fellowship and how you can live out your faith, bless Israel, and be blessed in return. Visit ifcj.org today. Again, that's ifcj.org. Be the blessing, live the word, answer the call.
The following is not an actor, but a real-life story from Trinity Debt Management.
I was finishing undergrad and got credit cards because I couldn't work full-time. So that started the credit card journey for me.
If you're in debt and you need help, call Trinity at 1-800-793-8548.
And then when I got married, we combined our credit card debt and it became impossible to pay off on our own. At that point, I was like, I don't know where to turn. And then I found Trinity.
Trinity will consolidate your accounts into one easy-to-manage monthly payment, reduce your interest, and possibly improve your credit score. You'll save thousands.
I initially was scared to call, and immediately I felt relief. I mean, in a matter of 3 years, we've already paid down $20,000 in credit card debt, which is huge.
Call Trinity at 1-800-793-8548. That's 1-800-793-8548.
I love that. I mean, it's interesting to think about how singleness and marriage actually could reinforce one another. And I don't know that I've done a lot of thinking about that. Obviously, I see it when you read through 1 Corinthians. That's the main place people would go to sort of look at singleness. Although you brought up Jesus' teaching on it in the Gospels, and so in Paul's context, he's pretty clear on singleness. That it's a viable strategy for some people. And do you find that passage in 1 Corinthians is really where Christians start to sort of slip into this idea that, well, if you're feeling lust, if you can't control yourself, then get married? I mean, Paul says as much there.
Yeah.
I think that's abstracting that from his context, right? Abstracting it from what he's interacting with in that moment, which is this Corinthian idea that men and women just shouldn't have sex at all. Like that seems to be what he's interacting with. He's not only affirming celibacy, but he's also saying, look, like sex should happen.
Yeah.
It should happen in appropriate ways and in appropriate places. Is that sort of, in your experience, is that where you see people sort of going off the rails with this? That advice of let's boil marriage down to something that is a sexual outlet for men who can't control themselves and women who can't control themselves? Do you see that's where that comes from?
Yeah, I do think 1 Corinthians 7:9, better to marry than to burn, taken out of context, is a common, it has a lot of pull in this conversation. And I think you are naming it spot on. The key is to understand the context. The key is to understand that the church in Corinth at this time had kind of gone too far in teaching about celibacy, and had this one group of Christians who were kind of mistaking, overzealously teaching that like everyone should be celibate and that sex is bad, which is not what Christ was suggesting. And then alongside that, there's this group of other Christians who almost have this like quasi-Gnostic view of life, that our bodies are these gross containers and all that matters is kind of our spiritual commitments. And so they are kind of saying they are celibate in spirit, and then still engaging with their bodies in sexual immorality. And at least, when you get deep into like the context and what is Paul responding to, many scholars have suggested that in the 1 Corinthians 7:9, what Paul is narrowly responding to is saying, hey, those of you who are claiming to be celibate, but basically doing a half-assed job of it and not even trying to do it, and like coming up with these like silly Gnostic, defenses for your spiritual celibacy and your like physical immorality. He's saying in a more of a facetious way, like anything would be better than that. It's better to marry than do that, right? But for me, I think it's really helpful to read 1 Corinthians 7 and Matthew 19 side by side.
Yeah.
So in 1 Corinthians 7, we have Paul kind of cautioning, like, don't make public commitments to vocational singleness and tell people to look to your faithfulness in vocational singleness to teach them something about the gospel, unless you're really ready to do that, unless you really have the gift and you've discerned that well and you think you're prepared to make that kind of commitment.
That's right.
And then in Matthew 19, Jesus appears to kind of, in surprising his disciples and surprising kind of the religious leaders who are asking him these questions about divorce, he seems to raise the bar and call people to a much more stringent commitments to faithfulness, and basically say, outside of a few exceptions, lifetime marriage is lifetime marriage. I want to return to God's original intentions for lifetime marriage. And then he says, not all can accept this. Only to those that this gift of Christian marriage has been given. Only those who can embrace it. He's saying, also, don't commit to Christian marriage unless you are ready to accept. You have the gift and you are ready to accept the difficulty of the calling. And so, I don't know, side by side, what I hear Paul and Jesus saying together is, do not rush into either Christian marriage or vocational singleness.
Right.
Do not step into either unless you have the gift. Do not publicly claim that I'm receiving this gift and look to my faithfulness to learn something about God's faithfulness, unless you're really ready for that weight. that responsibility.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, that's how I kind of understand 1 Corinthians 7:9.
No, it's really helpful. I think that's right. I mean, it's I guess I'm just struggling with the now that you've said it, sort of the overemphasis on marriage, and again, sort of Driscoll's book and read that, having a lot of new thoughts based on what you're saying, like how all this could really fit together. And I'm wondering, as you go in and talk to churches, part of what you're talking to churches about is how do we minister to people with same-sex attraction, and how do we help them live according to biblical wisdom?
Mm-hmm.
But as I listen to you talk more and more, it's like that's a message that doesn't really need to be tailored to that audience. It needs to be broadened to everybody, that we all live according to God's sexual wisdom. And then there are these particular aspects that are related to same-sex attracted people, in part because it's a unique problem, but also in part because there's a major social stigma attached to it. I guess that's a question.
Yeah.
Right. So what do you find that you struggle with most as you're consulting with churches? Do you find that they just don't have the words, or do you find that they're struggling with the stigma? Like, and I'll give you this example just so you can have my context for it. I was working at college, and a couple of faculty members come to me and expressed that they'd had students come to them and were expressing struggling with same-sex attraction, and they wanted me to get them some help because they didn't feel comfortable addressing it.
Sure.
Now, these are the same faculty members who would have worked with a heterosexual student who was struggling with pornography, let's say. Right. But this particular issue, they just felt completely inept to deal with. Didn't feel comfortable doing it. Didn't feel it just didn't resonate with them. And so there's part of me that understands it. Yeah. But then there was part of me that was just kind of like, it's a student who's struggling, and we do that all the time. And so there's going to be particulars. If you weighed it in, it'd probably be it's not going to be crazy. Yeah. It's going to be a little different than what you're usually used to, but it's not going to be like the craziest thing you've ever done. Yeah. And so, since that point, I'm just kind of sitting back like, what is it? What do you run into in these churches when, is it really something where they just don't understand how to articulate it, or more a reticence to dive into it?
Yeah, two things come to mind. So first, when I hear that hesitancy from pastors, parents, counselors, and I probe them a little bit, I asked some more questions. What they end up saying to me, if they're being really honest, is, well, I don't think lifetime celibacy is a good sell to straight people in my life, straight Christians in my life. That sounds lonely, unless you have an extraordinary gift for it, but certainly an involuntary long-term singleness, that sounds like a curse. I don't know how to. I would never try to sell that to straight Christians that I know. I don't know how to sell that to a gay Christian because I don't believe in it. Yeah, I still think the gay sex is a sin in any context, but I don't really know what to offer them. Right.
Yeah. If singleness isn't an option, then what else do you say?
Yeah. And I appreciate the honest answer from them. And to be clear, I don't think that that celibacy is the only option for Christians who experience same-sex attraction. Okay. Some Christians who experience same-sex attraction, even without meaningful kind of general physical romantic attraction to people of the opposite sex, will date individuals of the opposite sex with full transparency about their sexual orientation, will kind of develop specific interest and desire for a particular person of the opposite sex, and will end up marrying someone of the opposite sex in what's called kind of a mixed orientation marriage, and be really transparent about the differences in their experiences, both within their marriage and outside of their marriage. And those can be healthy too, but there's some ways in which that kind of mixed orientation marriage option was kind of abused in the church in the past. People were told never to share with anyone about your sexuality, just marry someone of the opposite sex and it'll fix everything. And we probably all know people who are impacted negatively by that kind of arrangement. So I'm not suggesting that, but I just do want to point out that I don't think celibacy is the only option for people who experience same-sex attraction. But I'd say the other big thing when we work with churches,
Yeah.
the other big blind spot is what churches usually do is they avoid talking too much about LGBT plus topics. Certainly don't talk about it at all with elementary school kids. They barely talk about it, maybe a little bit with like middle schoolers, and then maybe they'll talk about it a little bit more directly with high schoolers. But for the most part, they wait until a teen comes out, shares with them that they experience same-sex attraction, to disciple them around these topics, to guide them in how to think about this stuff. The problem is that on average, there's a 5-year gap between when a kid first notices same-sex attractions and first tells a parent or a pastor. And that is 5 years during which this kid is wrestling with this stuff alone in the closet, in the darkness of the closet, where the enemy tortures them. I mean, this was my experience. The enemy tortured me with lies that it was my fault that I experienced same-sex attraction, that God had not answered my prayers for my same-sex attractions to be eliminated because I was cursed or I was forsaken. It led to loneliness, isolation, anxiety, depression. For many, it leads to suicidality or believing that God does not love them and is not worth following, or abandoning God's wisdom, or abandoning a belief in God altogether. For most kids, when they share with a parent or pastor 5 years later, they've already lost their faith. And it's too late to get it back most of the time. I'm not saying the Holy Spirit can't do a miracle. I'm just saying anecdotally, from the hundreds of parents I've talked to in this situation, and the hundreds of friends I've had who are the same-sex attracted teen in this situation, it's too late. And so I think the key lever, the most important aspect of like LGBT plus ministry we can do is preventing that 5-year gap, that 5 years in the closet, that 5 years that leads to loss of faith or suicidality for a teen. Eliminate those 5 years. How can we eliminate those 5 years? How can we make sure that as soon as a teen notices same-sex attractions, they share with the parent or pastor, and they already have a little bit of hope that the parents will respond well, that God has good plans for them, that their life could be good? How do we make that happen? I think the only way to make that happen is our churches need to equip parents to have age-appropriate, frequent conversations with their kids about sexual stewardship for all people and about God's love and wisdom for LGBT plus people. And I think we need to make sure that before puberty, every kid hears, hey, we've talked about same-sex attraction, that particular kind of brokenness that some people experience.
Yeah.
Who knows? That might be your story. I hope not, because I don't want there to be anything about your story that makes your life more difficult. But all of us have got some stuff that makes our life more difficult. If that's your story, if you wake up one day and you realize you're attracted to other boys your same age instead of other girls your same age, I want you to know that you can tell me. Yeah. I want you to know that it's not your fault. God is not mad at you. I am not mad at you. God loves you deeply. I love you deeply. God has good wisdom for you and good plans for you. We can make sense of this together. You don't have to make sense of it alone. Please tell me.
Yeah.
We need
a sense in which, would you say there's a sense in which, so I want to return to a couple of things you said there.
Yeah.
So I actually think it's, in my mind, I'm like, it seems like it would be really controversial in a lot of churches to have these kind of conversations early on.
Could be.
We tend to think of it in terms of, look, let's give them the ideal, and the ideal will carry them through, as if the education is ultimately going to so impact the desires that they're never even going to think or feel any other way than just what the ideal is, which any of our experience would suggest that that's just not the case. Mm-hmm. And so what sort of conversations are you thinking about? I mean, I can remember having conversations with my son and daughter. They were intentional conversations, but also very brief conversations.
Yeah.
And I would just say, we noticed that there was the school would do a piece on LGBTQ, or there'd be a transgender kid, or something like that. They're running into it. And so we just say, we still love these people. This is just one of those things where when people are living outside of the context of, I don't think we phrased it like this, but essentially what we said was outside of God's wisdom, sometimes these things happen. We still love them, and we would love them to, we also love them to understand who Christ is and to imitate him in whatever way is appropriate for them at that moment.
Yeah.
I'm not sure we had those conversations particularly well. I think we got our point across.
Sure.
Overall. Yeah. Some guidance on how to have that conversation, I think, is really helpful.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yes, it makes sense that a lot of parents are afraid of those conversations. Also afraid to say the wrong things too early and confuse their kids. I totally understand that concern. I think the key is age appropriate conversations. So at Equip, our vice president of Impact, she is a mom herself. She's a former school teacher. One of her kids has been asking questions about her sexuality. Part of her story is that she was married to a gay man who was transparent about his sexuality before they got married. But then after they were married, he left the faith, and then he left their marriage. And so she's had to navigate honest conversations about that with her kids in age-appropriate ways throughout their lifetime. And so she has actually developed a really exhaustive resource for us, a parent course on how to equip parents around all these conversations. One of the key aspects of this is that she has conversation scripts for both proactive conversations to have with your kids and reactive conversations based on different topics, different questions. And then within each script for each question, it's here's the age 0 to 2 way to talk about this. Here's the 3 to 5 way to talk about this. Here's the 7 to 9 way to talk about this. It's chunked in age range in terms of building complexity and maturity. So I would recommend anyone kind of go to our website, check out those resources, and parents can get kind of on-demand access to those video resources and notes and handouts. But the other thing I would say is just encourage parents to take that creation, fall, redemption narrative that many of us have kind of been offered in our churches as ways to make sense of the big story of Scripture and make sense of a lot of things in life, and teach your kids about sexuality through that narrative. Yeah. God first made us in a world without pain and without sin and without blemish and without brokenness to relate and be in community and love in certain ways. And then sin and brokenness entered the world and bent everything. That means that all of us, all of our sexualities, all of our capacity and ways that we attempt to connect in friendship and relationship and community, whatever it looks like, is going to be impacted by the fall. And I don't know which particular kind of brokenness you're going to experience. I don't know how the fall is going to impact you particularly. I don't know what your temptations are going to be. I don't know what it's going to be more difficult for you than the next person in terms of the ways that you connect in friendship and relationship and community with others. But there is redemption. The Christ has already come and offered us his wisdom in terms of how to steward our sexualities in the midst of brokenness, and also his Holy Spirit to empower us to do it faithfully. Also, Jesus will return to finish the job of establishing a new heavens and new earth, where we will be done with all of this brokenness. And we'll be able to enjoy community perfectly with Jesus and with each other. And that's where we find ourselves in the story right now when it comes to creation, fall, redemption, and our need for community and connection and companionship.
The Bible tells us, I will bless those who bless you. That's not just a nice sentiment, it's biblical prophecy. And it's a commandment from God, it's a calling, and right now we're called to act. The teachings of the New Testament are deeply intertwined with the Hebrew Scriptures. As Christians, we are called to honor and respect this shared heritage. The Apostle Paul reminds us in Romans 11:18, do not consider yourself to be superior to those other branches. If you do, consider this. You did not support the root, but the root supports you. Supporting the people of Israel is more than a belief. It's a biblical mandate. By partnering with the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, IFCJ, we can live out this calling together. Just as the fellowship blesses God's children, we know that you will be blessed too. Learn more about the fellowship and how you can live out your faith, bless Israel, and be blessed in return. Visit ifcj.org today. Again, that's ifcj.org. Be the blessing, live the word, answer the call.
The following is not an actor, but a real-life story from Trinity Debt Management.
Every day I speak with people who are worried and are feeling a lot of pressure because of credit card debt. That's why I'm very proud of what we do at Trinity. We just help. We give people the support they need, along with a real plan to become debt-free. Credit card bills are consolidated into a single monthly payment that is much less than what they were paying before. Most of our members end up saving thousands and even may improve their credit scores by as much as 200 points. I know from the bottom of my heart that I'm making a difference in the lives of the people we help. It just makes me really happy.
If credit card debt has you down, call Trinity at 1-800-793-8548.
My name is Julie, and I'm a Trinity counselor. Call me and become debt-free for keeps.
1-800-793-8548.
Yeah. So that sort of connects with where I wanted to go back to as well, the mixed orientation marriage.
Yeah.
Like, I think some of these frameworks are actually really helpful because, just what you just said, everybody's going to struggle with their own sense of brokenness.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I've worked through with people as I disciple them, work through different things with them is we can't fix it all at once.
Yeah.
Like sometimes, like the Holy Spirit is convicting us about X when we still need to change Y and Z.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so, we have to give people some time. We have to give some patience. We have to continue recognizing that there's more brokenness there. We're not saying that the brokenness is okay. It's still brokenness that we need to name as such. But it isn't as if just because we want to prioritize one sin over another at this very moment, that's the one that is really going to get fixed immediately. Sure. And I think we make that mistake an awful lot. One of the things I like about what you said is, there's the broad aspect. Everybody's broken. There's brokenness all over the place. Not sure what kind of brokenness you're going to experience. And it strikes me that that's so parallel with this sort of mixed orientation marriage, which I hadn't heard about these things. So, but it makes intuitive sense to me because I'm not attracted to every woman I see.
Sure.
And I think this is one of those heterosexual myths, that men are just out, their tongues are wagging around any woman they happen to see. Well, that's not the case. I love my wife particularly.
Yeah.
Right. And there's a different sort of love there for my wife particularly. Yeah. And that's not to say I don't find any other woman attractive ever, but it's also not to say that I'm just chasing, oh man, if I was single, I'd just be chasing every woman I saw. That's not the case. Oh. There's an abstract notion of, yes, this is generally what I'm attracted to versus the concrete relationship I have with one person that sort of isn't exactly the same category as that broader attraction.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, I felt like going back to that because I think people might hear that and be like, oh, that's really strange. Sure. We're just not used to it. But am I articulating that in a way that would resonate with you? Like, is that sort of how you would think about it as well?
Yeah, and I would say if people are curious about kind of reading more about this kind of phenomena, I'd really suggest the book Impossible Marriage by Lori Krieg. And she talks about, she and her husband in the book kind of talk about their mixed orientation marriage and what their impossible marriage taught them about, like, marriage for everyone and following Jesus for everyone. I think it's a great book. But yeah, I'll say I'm personally committed to vocational singleness. But I generally would identify as like gay, not bisexual. But I was in a Christian fraternity in college, and while also being transparent about my sexual orientation, while having to take girls to date events, and I, by accident, essentially ended up like enjoying some of those date events, and then asked some of those women if they wanted to keep on hanging out, and ended up dating 3 of them and falling in love with 2 of them. And one of them, we almost got engaged, but broke up for reasons unrelated to my sexuality. But that's all to say, like, mixed orientation marriage was a real possibility for me. I knew that could work if God called me to that. I felt God positively called me to vocational singleness, and so that's why I've stepped into that. But I've got lots of friends walking out mixed orientation marriages. I'm outside of all the public ministry stuff I do, I'm also a licensed professional counselor, and I actually meet with a good number of men in mixed orientation marriages in private practice counseling. And one thing I'll say, maybe this is a helpful kind of like window into it, because I think people might assume like, oh, the biggest relational challenge these marriages probably have is that there's like not enough sex.
Yeah.
That there's just not enough desire. That it feels like there's an emptiness or a gap there. Maybe they never have kids and they feel left out. I will say consistently, the mixed orientation marriages I know, they enjoy marital intimacy about as frequently as other, typical opposite sex couples do.
Yeah.
And, maybe it's not as frequent as others in the first year or two of marriage, but once you get to year 5, it's the same.
Yeah.
And they have kids, sometimes many kids, so that is not where there's a gap or there's a difference. I'll say most commonly what leads to kind of the end of mixed orientation marriages is if there wasn't transparency about the sexual orientation early in the dating process, or there's hiding later in the marriage, or if the couple doesn't share that they're in a mixed orientation marriage with other couples that they hang out with at their church. Because what a very common problem is individuals in a mixed orientation marriage, they'll get to a difficult spot in their marriage and they will assume it's because one of us experiences same-sex attraction. That's why this moment is hard.
Right.
And that might eventually lead to divorce. If they only had some other typical opposite sex couples in their church and said, hey, we're struggling with this. What do you think? Is it because one of us is gay? And almost every time the other couple say, no, that's something every marriage struggles with. That has nothing to do with the unique features of your mixed orientation marriage. So I really encourage couples to be transparent with each other early in the dating relationship, be transparent with each other throughout their dating, throughout the relationship, and bring other couples into it. Be honest with the kind of the people in their life about this so that they can kind of give them a sense of perspective on whether or not the thing they're struggling with has something to do with the fact that one of them is gay or doesn't. So yeah, that's a little bit there.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
Well, we're kind of coming to a close at the end of the episode.
Sure.
I thought maybe I'd ask, are you okay with the political question?
Sure. I might not answer. We'll see. But
yeah. So I'm writing on this incident at Texas A&M.
Sure.
There was a child literature class where they were teaching about transgender issues, and you have the Trump order about just male and female and the trans issues and those kind of things. I grew up when gay marriage was just sort of percolating. My kids think it's fascinating that Don't Ask, Don't Tell that Bill Clinton implemented, right? But you've always had from its inception an awful lot of political work being done in the areas of sexuality and civil rights, sexuality and ideology now.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, just from your perspective, I have trouble believing that some of that is actually helpful.
Sure.
That it doesn't just create either overly positive or overly negative perceptions that then tend to creep into the church a bit.
Sure.
So I'm wondering if you can kind of speak to just generally how do you see politics, not saying it never does anything good, but what do you see as the major influences from these political sort of activities in this realm that are really trying to govern a civil space?
Yeah.
How are they sneaking into a sacred space like the church and influencing how people think about these things?
Yeah. So I think we get into trouble when, as believers, we let politicians lead our response to important cultural and theological questions.
Yeah.
And I think that happens a lot. I think that happened in the gay marriage debates, right? It became a debate about what is natural order marriage, what kind of marriages should we give certain legal rights to. We weren't having really a conversation about what is the kind of Christian marriage that God joins and sustains in a unique way that is different than opposite-sex non-Christian marriage, for example.
Yeah.
Why were we not most concerned with not what is in our laws, but what are we blessing in our churches?
Yeah.
And also having honest conversations about divorce and remarriage, and about Christian marriages accepting the call to raise children for the sake of the kingdom. If we really cared about the sanctity of marriage, there are other conversations we could be having, right?
Yep.
Or we could be having conversations about, if we think God has something better to offer gay people than gay marriage, let's prove it.
Yeah.
And I don't mean theologically prove it. I mean in the fruit of the ministry of our churches, let's prove it. Let's show. Yes, exactly. So I think the same thing. Unfortunately, I think history could repeat itself with trans topics. And I wrote about this actually recently in Christianity Today. This was last December when they were doing the first hearings on the Supreme Court case around trans adolescent medical transition. And then we this past summer, then we got the final ruling on that. My invitation to Christians was, let's not repeat the past. Let's not be sucked into representing Jesus by just repeating political talking points in conversations about trans topics. Let's pause. Let's, as believers, go to the scriptures and try to understand what is Christ's love and wisdom for a person who experiences gender incongruence. What is Christ's love and wisdom on trans topics? And then show up to the conversation with that. And there's some resources on Equip's website for kind of how Christians can start to think well about that. But there's a reality that while there are some teens who are just calling themselves non-binary or trans to piss off their parents or because they're rejecting toxic masculinity, there are a meaningful number of kids and teens who, since they were 3 years old, they looked in the mirror and they saw their body. And by no fault of their own, they felt like they were in the wrong body. Yeah. And they experience, I think most likely their body physically has God intended, but they're experiencing a brokenness in their experience of their gender spiritually and mentally. And it's no different than my same-sex attractions in some way. It's no different than the thorn in Paul's side. You know, it's no different than something that is off about us because we live in a broken world that God may not make right, even if we ask for it, on this side of heaven.
Right. And
we might not know the full reasons, but in part, it reminds us daily that we need Jesus.
Yeah.
And that we as a church need to come around each other and help each other carry our burdens. Yeah. Are our churches places where a teen could share, I look in the mirror, I feel like I'm in the wrong body. I want to honor that my body is probably the body God meant to give me, but this is really hard.
Yeah.
What do I do? Can you help me carry this faithfully? Are we churches that are ready for that? That's what we should be like putting our time and energy into, instead of the bathroom debates and the sports debates and that kind of stuff. Because this is about the gospel. We know that not straight non-Christians, when they're asked, why wouldn't you give Jesus a chance? When they're surveyed, number one response they give repeatedly in these kinds of surveys is, "Oh, my perception of Christians' treatment of LGBT plus people." Right? How we participated in the gay marriage debates erected barriers to the gospel, made Jesus look ugly for a lot of people.
Yeah.
We can't repeat that. We've got to do it differently for the sake of the gospel. I would encourage believers to think more deeply about that. Check out Equip's website for some resources we have on that, or check out Preston Sprinkle's book Embodied on that topic. But I think we need to get this right. And I think we have a chance not only to prevent the negatives of the gay marriage debates, but I think we can make trans topics a winning conversation for the gospel if we do this well. So let's do it.
Man, I really appreciate your insights. I mean, this has been a great conversation. I feel like I learned a lot some different frameworks to be thinking through some things. And the website, equipyourcommunity.org.
Yes.
Community.org. I encourage you all to get some of these resources, because even as Peter's talking about some of this stuff, I'm sitting back going, I don't know that I know how to do that. I just don't know that I understand how to have those conversations in a fruitful way. And so you've got resources that can help people do that. It'd be crazy not to use them. Equip your community. Check out Peter's work. He's got, if you go to his website, it's petervalk.com, correct?
Yeah, Pieter L. Valk. It's spelled funny, though.
Pieter
My
L.
first
Valk.
name is Dutch, so it's PieterLValk.com. And that's also my handle on social. So if you're on X or you're on Instagram, and that's how you kind of learn about some of this stuff, at Pieter L. Valk on those different platforms. So, yeah.
I'll include that in the show notes, so make sure you navigate to the right place. But I encourage you to check out some different things as well. Really appreciate having you on, brother. And just thanks for the work you're doing. Thanks for coming on and sharing. And we'd love to have you back on to talk more if you're open. So,
For sure, yeah. Thank you, James.
All right, everybody. Well, we'll call it a day. And appreciate you being with us today on Thinking Christian. And we'll catch you on the next episode. Take care, everybody.
Just want to take a second to thank the team at Life Audio for their partnership with us on the Thinking Christian podcast. If you go to lifeaudio.com, you'll find dozens of other faith-centered podcasts in their network. They've got shows about prayer, Bible study, parenting, and more.
For some of us, personal finances aren't just personal. They include loved ones, neighbors, the communities we call home, and the causes we hold in our hearts. At Thrivent, planning your finances is bigger than just money. We help you put your plans into motion and faith into action so you can do more for the ones in your heart. Because sometimes all you need to make a difference is someone to help you make it happen. Thrivent, where money means more. Connect with us at Thrivent.com.